Welcome back. Two Bets of the North, Doug Lesmerises and Tyler Shoemaker. We're talking about the playoff games, TShoe, right? People care about these things. We're just going to give them some math and vibes on these 4 playoff games, which is a worthwhile exercise because everybody's going to be tuned in.
Yeah, and like we've said before, it's hard in the postseason to use my numbers for a lot of the bowl games and stuff because of opt-outs and stuff. But as we've said, the playoff, I do feel like you can rely on the numbers. Now, I do think, more so than like a regular season game, I do think the playoffs, you do have to account for the vibes a little more, which I know you always do. But this is more of a reminder to myself that I need to factor in the vibes a little bit. And, in some of these matchups, it's like, okay, who's been in this type of on this type of stage before and who hasn't? So we'll get into that when we go game by game. But just something I want to throw out there initially.
All right, so we're not making any real money bets this week because we are staying ahead. We are ahead for the year. We've been betting real money all season. We started with a $5,000 bankroll. We are up $49.07. We're going to give that to feedingamerica.org. So we're locking that in. We're not going to risk going under. So these are our bet suggestions. We're not just, throwing you stuff we don't think has a chance, but we're not betting our actual company money on this. And just as a reminder, best bets, we're above water on this. TShoe is 26-25. I'm 23-21 on our best bets this year. We were 7-7 on our $500 real money bets. All right, TShoe, let's start with the first playoff game on Friday night, Indiana at Notre Dame. This has been your team, brother. You've been on the Irish since week 1 when we won on Notre Dame with a $500 bet against Texas A&M. Yep. Notre Dame's favored by 7.5 in this game at home. The over-under is 51.5, and you are just dying for this number to get to 7 instead of 7.5. Are you not?
Yeah, and it's touched 7 a couple of times, but there's clearly been an appetite in the market to bet on Indiana here. And when it opened at 8.5, my projection's 8 on the game. So I agreed with that initial buy on Indiana, but now that we're under 8 and it, 7.5, 8, that's kind of a dead number. I wouldn't want to back Notre Dame at that number, but if you can grab a 7 or, we'll see closer to kickoff if more Indiana money comes in, and maybe it touches 6.5. I would absolutely love Notre Dame at 6.5, but I will probably end up, if I can't get Notre Dame -7 pregame, I would almost assure you'll be able to live. So I will be on Notre Dame at some point, whether I can get that pregame or if I get it, early in the first quarter.
So, a lot of these sites now, TShoe, you can move the line to get what you want. So on DraftKings, for instance, the actual line is 7.5. If you want to get Notre Dame at -7, you get it at -125. If you want to get Notre Dame at -6.5, you get it at -137. So now we're talking about you're moving the line and trading the juice to get the number that you want. For instance, 6.5 at -137 seems like giving a lot of juice, but I know there's always a formula for you with this, but just generally speaking, if you want to say you want to bet Notre Dame, man, I've loved TShoe's numbers on Notre Dame all year. I really wanted it at 7 instead of 7.5. Should you just be willing to say, I'll take the -125 to get the half point?
In this case, I don't think so, because like I said, we've seen that there is enough Indiana appetite that it is going to touch 7. It has touched 7. So you're going to be able to get that at -110 in some form or fashion. So I wouldn't, unless you're just in a situation where you're not going to be able to, from a time standpoint, I'm going to be busy with family, not going to be able to look at it. If you need to just
busy lock it with family, then when you could be live betting a college football game, what's wrong with people?
Yeah. Not that I would condone that type of behavior. I'm going to be glued to my phone. Family be damned, but no, I'm just kidding. But you're going to be able to get -7 at -110. So I wouldn't force it again, unless it's just a time commitment thing for you.
Her solo's coming. There's no place like home for the holidays.
I'm not saying I haven't done it.
Your sleeve. Oh my God. Fathers of the year we are. Okay. So your instinct, your first instinct here is dancing around with Notre Dame if you can get it at the number that you like. But we are each going to offer a bet suggestion on each of these playoff games. And yours is an over. And you were very successful on conference championship game overs. You like the ACC title game over, hit easily. You like the Big Ten title game over, hit easily. What do your numbers say that have you liking over 51.5 for this Notre Dame-Indiana game?
Yeah, I actually project 57.5. Now, I know, I think some of this discrepancy, because I mean, a 6-point discrepancy on the total, in a game that's of this magnitude is rare, I think, for me. But I think what's doing that is there is projected to be some snow in this game. But so there are people that when they'll look at the weather forecast and when they see that there's going to be any type of like wind or precipitation, they just automatically bet the under, basically just out of principle, which, okay, that's their strategy. But when you look at how Notre Dame in particular, when you look at how Notre Dame plays, and we've seen Notre Dame with a propensity to, really hang some big numbers this year. Like if Notre Dame gets to 42 in this game, like I'm not going to be surprised, snow or not. I think their running attack, both with their running backs and with Riley Leonard, the quarterback, I think they're going to be able to do a lot of damage on the ground. And so, I mean, if Indiana contributes 2 or 3 touchdowns here, I think this is going to cash, because I think Notre Dame might hang a big number here. And as I said, we've seen Marcus Freeman has wanted to make a statement when he's had the opportunity to make statements this year, and that's been quite a bit. He has done so. He does not take his foot off the gas at all. And why would he in a playoff game where, the world's watching and you can, really get that respect? So I think Notre Dame's going to hang a big number here, which again is why I like them on the side and I like the over here.
So my bet here is a first quarter total, and the 10.5 on a first quarter total always makes you nervous, right? Because you touchdown and a field goal and you lose. But over 10.5 at plus 106. Indiana scored a first quarter touchdown in both the Michigan and Indiana game, Michigan and Ohio State games, which were the 2 games where their offense was the most non-functional. They came out and marched down the field on Ohio State and then didn't do anything the rest of the game. But those first quarters only hit at 7 because I think because Michigan and Ohio State didn't score, because Michigan has a non-functional offense and Ohio State starts slow. And then they wound up scoring. Ohio State was on like a 15-play drive that they cashed it in pretty early in the second quarter. So the reason I like this over is that I believe in the idea of Indiana coming out with a good script and being able to move the ball early. But I also think, to your point, Notre Dame will also be able to do that. So I don't know. Is there anything to you, like our 10.5-point first quarter totals? Do they scare you away because you're looking at you've got to get 2 touchdowns to do this, or a touchdown and 2 field goals? Or are you okay with this bet for me? I think the explosive nature of both offenses, and I think you make a good point that like I definitely would expect, and this was kind of part of my handicap for the game over. It's like I do kind of expect Indiana to come out with a good plan initially. I don't think they're going to be able to just move it up and down the field all day on Notre Dame, but I do think early they might have some success. And I definitely think Notre Dame's going to be able to run the ball, explosively. That's the thing. They run the ball efficiently, but they run the ball really explosively with Jeremiah Love in particular. So I really like this. And I mean, you're getting plus money. I might join you on this. I like this. Yeah, I know Landis has talked about Jadarian Price, their other back, as a really explosive guy as well. So I do think, and this is one of those, I liked it. Then I started to scare myself off. Then I'm like, no, like, Doug, you don't know what the heck you're doing half the time. Like, if you have an instinct, and then I almost think it's a little bit counter, because I do think sometimes, because the 10.5 sort of scares me, but the idea of them coming out and scoring early, I like. So I don't want to be scared off by the number if I like the theory. So I'm going to take this at plus 106. All right, let's move to SMU at Penn State. This is the noon game on Saturday at Penn State. Penn State favored by 8.5. The total's 54.5. And this is another one, TShoe, where you like the favorite to put up some big points, because your bet here is a team total on Penn State over 31.5 at minus 110. Yeah, I bet the game total over. I got
52, I think, like when the lines first came out. So I don't like the game total as much here, but I do think similarly to Notre Dame, I think Penn State, they're going to be excited to be there. I think their offense has looked really good recently. It looked really good in the Big Ten championship against Oregon. I think if they come out and let it loose again, I think they're going to hang a big number. Now, I think SMU is going to be able to score, particularly early in this game. But James Franklin is a guy in these type of situations, like you don't necessarily want to bet on him as far as like, is he going to cover the number or not, whatever. But if there's an opportunity for this to be close in the fourth quarter, close to covering the over, and James Franklin has an opportunity to punch in a late touchdown to put an exclamation point on it, he definitely will. So that's the type of guy, you think of like an Oregon, sometimes they just kind of sit on it if they have a lead and they're happy to just get out of there. So like a team total over for them would be a little more scary, but Penn State and James Franklin, I can feel confident in betting overs with them because they want to just hang as big a number as possible.
All right. My bet is a first half bet. Penn State -4.5 at -105 on FanDuel. So the game is 8.5. The first half is 4.5. Just what do you generally think sort of making first half bets where you're just splitting the total spread basically in half and riding with that? To me, I think I feel more confident about, do I think Penn State can have a touchdown lead at the half, as opposed to, am I sure that Penn State's going to win by more than a touchdown at the end of the game, which is why I like the first half bet. Where are you generally on first half bets?
I mean, I think it depends on the team. As we've seen, going back a couple of years with our Ohio State, like first quarter over bets that we were cashing there for a while. Like, I think it depends on the team. And when you look at, in this instance, you look at how SMU came out against Clemson, they came out dead. Like they looked like they were dead in the first half against Clemson. It took a furious late game comeback for them to make that a game. So
yes,
if that's, if that trend is going to continue, then I really like this -4.5 in the first half.
And I like Andy Kotelnicki to have a plan. They're going to have to make adjustments with Bo Prabula no longer with the team as the backup wrinkle quarterback, but I think they'll adjust to that. I think Drew Aller will come out and throw. I think SMU has a couple vulnerabilities in the secondary. I just think Penn State will come out, pedal down, and then Kevin Jennings is dangerous, and I can see that game script. You bring up a good point with how it went in the Clemson game. That if it goes something like that, it takes a little bit, and it's a long way for SMU to come. This is really kind of they joined a new conference and made the playoff in a new conference, stepping up to the Power Four. So they've already dealt with new uncomfortable situations all year, but this is quite a road trip for them to come to Penn State. So I can maybe see a slow start for them. So I do like this first half bet. Clemson at Texas. It's the 4 p.m. game on Saturday. Texas is favored by 12. We have the total at 52. And our best bets here are the same thing, which is riding with your boy Dabo. We're both taking Clemson +12 at -110. And I will tell you, I am interested in the money line of Clemson winning this game as well. What do your numbers say about this game?
I agree. My numbers have Texas -7 here. So I was really surprised. I don't really understand why this game has, I think some sharp offshore books opened this at like 8. And it quickly got bet up over 10, which is where it's stayed, between like 11 and 12 most of since the lines came out. But I don't see it. The numbers tell me that Clemson is the side here. My eyeballs do. I mean, again, you don't want to put too much into like teams' records and all that, but Texas didn't beat a team over 8-4 all year.
Yeah.
Quinn Ewers has been banged up, has not looked particularly good, I don't think. If you told me that like, Quinn Ewers is out for this game and they're just going to ride with Arch Manning the whole game, like that might make me have to make some, manual adjustments in my head of like, okay, well, what does that look like? But if they're going to ride with Quinn Ewers, who's been banged up and not playing very well, particularly in huge games, like I don't know. And again, like I mentioned earlier, Dabo and those guys have been there before. I know Texas made the playoff last year and lost to Washington, a team that they were favored over, if I recall correctly. This is one instance where I think the experience of Dabo is really gonna pay dividends for Clemson. And Cade Klubnik is playing the best football of his career right now. So going into the season, if you'd have said, who would you rather have, Klubnik or Ewers, I think it would have been a no-brainer. You take Quinn Ewers. But I mean, right now with the health and just trend of his play lately, like I would take Cade Klubnik right now. And Phil Moffitt,
sure.
I know you guys talked about this on KOT, and Phil Moffitt's been playing very well when he's healthy, and we expect him to be more healthy in this game. So I really like Clemson here, and I'm with you. I'll go ahead and say in our bowl pick'em, I actually in my bracket I picked Clemson to win this game.
Yeah, so did I. So let's talk how to bet this then, okay? Because again, there's what you think, and then there's how to bet it to make money. So if you can get Clemson plus 12 at minus 110, or you can also get Clemson on the money line at plus 360. So you don't want to have Clemson play a really nice competitive game and lose by 6, and you not wind up with a plus total on your bet, right? That somehow you hit the money line so hard that they almost won but didn't, and you didn't wind up making money. So what would be the best way to do this? Is it something like a full unit on Clemson plus 12 and a half unit on the money line at plus 360? Or how would you say a quarter of a unit at plus 360? How would you suggest people go about this? Because I really want to at least bet something on the money line if you and I are both picking Clemson to win outright, but I want to make sure I win money overall if they only cover but don't win.
Yeah, I think the quarter unit thing makes a lot of sense because the spread is so big. Considering you think that the underdog might win, like normally this would be like a 4-point spread, and you're like, okay, well, do you just play the plus 4? Do you play the money line? But I mean, on plus 12, like that gives you, as you often say, like that gives you some cushion, some comfort there. So yeah, I would play the majority of my unit, or again, depending on your bankroll and your bankroll management, you could play a whole unit on plus 12 and then do a quarter of a unit or a half unit on the money line. What I wouldn't do, like you said, is just like overcommit to the money line and then have the right kind of read on the game, and then Texas wins on a last second field goal, and now you win nothing. So I would definitely have at least a half a unit on the plus 12, and then whatever you want to do, half unit or less on the money line.
Because as dumb as I am, I think the worst thing, if you're just wrong, you just read the game wrong. That's it. We just blew it. We just saw that the wrong way. But when you have right read, wrong bet, oh my gosh, that's what drives you crazy, right? That you felt like you had a handle on this, and then you look down and you think, I won 74 cents between all my Clemson bets when I had a total read on this game. And like you said, they lost by a last second field goal. So you just have to be aware of that. Sometimes I chase the action. It's like, let's go crazy on the money line. It's like, what are you doing? Money line sprinkle, but really take this plus 12 and take it to heart.
Yeah. And one last kind of strategic point to make here is like, you also, so if you bet the money line and Clemson jumps out, 10-0 or something like that, you are going to be able to, kind of come back and hedge a little bit on Texas live. If you're going to be able to watch the game and you want to be like really strategic with it, you can also kind of hedge off of that a little bit by getting Texas, -3 or Texas plus money on the money line, depending on the point in the game. So something to just look for if you do bet the money line here, that you can, give yourself some cushion there to not absorb as big a blow if Clemson would happen to blow it if they jump out early.
Okay. So we like this. And I just think we'll talk about this a little bit later. It's just hard this is not a way to bet, or is it? To just think to yourself, all the favorites aren't going to win. Is that a way to bet? Is that an actual strategic betting thing that you look at these 4 games and think to yourself, an underdog's going to win somewhere? Or do you or is this like coin flips, where each individual coin flip is a 50-50 proposition and you can't get caught up in trends because it's an individual thing? How would a really smart bettor look at this kind of thing?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them coin flips, because I mean, again, we got a 12-point spread here, which is crazy high, as we said, but I wouldn't call them coin flips. But I mean, there is a way to calculate that by just like looking at the money line, coming up with the implied probability, and then like, I mean, it's a decent probability that all the favorites win. Just scanning here, I mean, Penn State's over touchdown, Ohio State's a touchdown favorite,
They're all over a touchdown.
So I mean, you're talking about touchdown favorites. So it's not like we've got a bunch of 3-point spreads.
Yeah.
So I mean, it is certainly possible. Now, just having observed the sport and the way that goes, like I would be surprised if all the favorites win. But and again, like, and that was kind of part of my thinking here is like, okay, I think Ohio State's going to win. I think Notre Dame's going to win. I think Penn State's going to win. That kind of leaves me with Clemson. And, you know, for all the points I laid out earlier, like I think Clemson is the underdog that kind of upsets the apple cart here.
Okay. Last game, Tennessee at Ohio State. Ohio State's a 7.5-point favorite on Saturday night. The total is 46.5. What do your numbers tell you about this?
Yeah, I've got Ohio State -10, and my total projection's right at the number. I'm at about 46, so nothing on the total for me. But you know, I think Ohio State. I will say again, like I'm publicly an Ohio State fan. I went to Ohio State. Everybody understands that by now. I will say, just as someone who has like analyzed how these things go, the discourse throughout the week. Or throughout the last couple of weeks since the Michigan game and since this matchup was announced, I feel like people have written Ohio State off. And that's not me like with my fan hat on, like we're the underdog. I mean, Ohio State's a 7.5-point favorite for a reason. But just even if this was two teams I didn't care about at all, I would be like, man, everyone's talking about this one team and kind of writing this other team off. And my numbers say the team they're writing off is going to cover this number. Like that's usually a pretty good recipe. So as an Ohio State fan, it does make me feel pretty good. Just kind of those, again, vibes around this game. I think a lot of people think Tennessee is gonna go into the horseshoe. I mean, you hear all about like the fan stuff and the ticket stuff. Like I feel like people think Tennessee is just gonna roll in there and like Ohio State's just gonna roll over dead. I think Ohio State showed us who they are for 11 games of the season. They had a very aberrant performance in the Michigan game. So I said this on VSiN yesterday, unless Tennessee rolls in there with Block M helmets, I don't think Ohio State's going to play like they did against Michigan. And I think they're definitely the better team here.
I think one of the best things that you've done this year, I mean, we've talked about it so much, is your analysis of Notre Dame. And you've really been all over how good they've been. And you have them higher, I think, in your TShoe index than they are in the polls or that kind of thing. And the reason that happened, right, and you've talked about this, is because you kind of threw out the Northern Illinois game.
Yep. Because
you look at Power 4 games and you just kind of ignored that game as an outlier. And I think it allowed you to have a very successful, from a betting perspective, read on Notre Dame. Obviously, this is not the same thing because it's not a MAC team. But is there something in betting strategy, TShoe, when you're looking at numbers that maybe sometimes you kind of throw out a game? Because although this is not Northern Illinois, I do think for the things that I've talked about on the show a million times that you just talked about, the mental, emotional part of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, you can't throw it out entirely. But I think you can throw it out some. And if you throw it out and think of Ohio State as the team they were going into the Michigan game, they would be favored, I think, by 10 or 11 or 12 in a game like this if they weren't coming off a miserable performance against their rival. So should you throw it out to some degree?
So I think that's a fair point. And the thing that gives me confidence is that I didn't throw it out. That game is factored in, and I still have Ohio State projected to win by 10. So like that is a great point. But you know, as you were talking, I was just kind of looking quickly at Ohio State's game grades in my rating system. And okay, what would we say their second worst performance of the year is? Nebraska. Probably off the top of my head. Yeah. Their Nebraska game grade was a full touchdown higher than it was in Michigan. So like that Michigan game is just like, if you told me like, hey, I have a rating system, I'm going to throw that game out, like I would not quibble with that at all, because from like when you're just looking at the data points, like that one sticks out so much as like that's not who this team really is.
Right.
You know, looking at the previous 11 data points. So I did factor it in, and Ohio State's still projected to win by 10 in my numbers. So
okay. So your best bet here is on the Ohio State defense. It's a Tennessee team total under 18.5 at minus 114 on FanDuel. Why do you like this so much?
Because I think for Ohio State to win, I just don't see Ohio State winning this game or covering this game. Again, I've got them projected to win by 10. I don't think they're going to win by 10 like 45-35. I think if they win, if they cover this number, it's going to have to be like, I don't know, 28-18, 24-14. The Tennessee offense, as you pointed out several times this year, is not particularly good and threatening. I know the run game has put up some numbers, but to be honest with you, run games like that, and unless you just have a freak running back, it really just doesn't scare me from the Ohio State standpoint, because I think it's nothing Jim Knowles hasn't seen, can't dial it up. The defense has been very good against the run pretty much all year. Someone was like tweeting stats at me like, well, they gave up 4.5 yards per carry to Caleb Johnson or whatever. And I'm like, okay, that's not very good. Like that's not great. Like if that number started with a 6, that's one thing, but they handled Caleb Johnson. The Oregon guy hit a couple, but that's because their passing game was so explosive. Like Tennessee's not that. And Tennessee's receivers are kind of banged up. So from what I've read, I do expect them to play, but they've been kind of banged up. So the Tennessee offense doesn't scare me. I think for Tennessee to win this game, Tennessee would have to win this game like Michigan did. I think it would have to be like literally 13-10 for Tennessee to win this game. I think the Ohio State offense is gonna wake up here. But Jim Knowles said something in his press conference this week that Landis was reporting, that basically Jim Knowles said, like, if we got to win the game 3-0, we'll win the game 3-0. Like it's on the defense to win this game, and we know that. So if that's the mentality that they're going into, that's kind of what made me look at this. Is like, okay, I think the Ohio State defense, which they've leaned on all year, Oregon game notwithstanding, because their receivers are fantastic, but I think the Ohio State defense is really going to show up, and the Tennessee offense just doesn't really scare me that much.
Again, I've cited these numbers a lot this week. The 6 games against their 4 non-conference games and the 2 worst defenses they played in the SEC, Vanderbilt and Mississippi State, Tennessee scored 53 points per game. In their other 6 games in the SEC against good or okay defenses, they scored 22 points per game. So this is in that threshold. So you're saying under 18.5, when against anybody decent, they've averaged 22, and Ohio State's defense is probably, Alabama's is good, but like statistically, Ohio State's going to be the best defense they've played. So I think there's a lot here, vibes and math, that would lead you to under the team total for Tennessee. I'm going to go with the Ohio State third quarter bet, which is something that people noticed during the course of this year. You can get Ohio State in the third quarter right now at minus 1.5, at minus 104. So I think this is either Ohio State's in a tight game or down, and they've got to come out in the third quarter and save their season, or they're rolling and they're going to keep rolling. And they've been a good third quarter team all year. And then this is one of those things, when you bet a third quarter bet before the game, you really care about the coin toss, because now you want Ohio State to win the coin toss and defer and get the ball first in the third quarter and drive down the field and score for a touchdown. So I noticed there were other people talking about this third quarter bet. I think it came up on this show. Is there a reason to do this before the game? Or can you just wait and do it at halftime? Or is it possible that line is going to move enough by what has happened in the game that you'd rather go ahead and grab this thing right now at minus 1.5 for the Buckeyes? Is this a reasonable bet, or am I nuts?
No, I really like this. If you recall, I bet Ohio State minus 8.5 in the second half before the game against Michigan, because for all the same reasons you just outlined, I didn't, specify it to the third quarter, but the same kind of line of thinking in that, Ohio State, other than the Michigan game, has come out of halftime with excellent adjustments on both sides of the ball, but particularly on defense, I would say. And they've just really suffocated people in the second halves of games. So that's why it was like all the more confusing, the Michigan game, that like they just didn't change anything, I feel like. But again, they showed over 11 games that they are excellent in the third quarter. They're excellent with second half adjustments. I really like this. This is another one I'm going to take a really close look at and might join you on.
Yeah. So there's a couple future things I want to talk about, but there's just a couple. There are other bowls happening. How invested are you going to be personally in making actual bowl bets this season? Or are you kind of mostly out of that business when you're trying to figure out motivation and opt-outs and all those kind of things?
Yeah, very little to none. I haven't. I had like a small like pizza money bet on Memphis the other night, but other than that, like I'm not. I had such a good season, particularly the second half of the season, week 14 notwithstanding, that like I'm just kind of like we are on the show. Like we're up. I'm gonna quit while I'm ahead. Basically, I'm okay because I would be furious because I'm up around I think 10 units on the season. I would be furious if I threw away half of that trying to bet on bowl games where I don't know who's playing and who's motivated and all that. So I will be limited at best here in betting bowl season.
So I would suggest for anybody who wants to have some action on bowl games but doesn't want to throw away potentially real money, come join us in our bowl pool at poolpartygaming.com. The KOTN Bowl Madness. We have 20 bowls. We've only had one so far, so you missed that. If you haven't signed up yet, it's fine. Who cares? You missed the Memphis, West Virginia game. We're only betting on Northern Bowls, so come join us there. Poolpartygaming.com. We'll have a bowl pool, and we have a bracket contest. So they're separate. We'll also combine them with the point totals there. It's a good time. And then that way you can have an eye out on bowl games and have a little bit of a rooting interest without having to throw away your actual bankroll. So join us at poolpartygaming.com. The day after Christmas, the 26th, you do like Toledo +7 against Pitt a little bit? Yes?
Yeah. So I only project Pitt -3 in that game, just like based on what they did during the season. And then when you factor in Pitt's got a whole list of opt-outs and transfers, and quarterback Eli Holstein has been hurt. We don't know if he's going to play. I believe the backup is in the transfer portal. Yep. So if Holstein doesn't play, they're going to be on their third string quarterback. You know, I do feel like these MAC schools, when they play bigger teams, like that's kind of an audition for them, especially in this portal era. Like, hey, let me go ball out against Pitt and then enter the portal and get myself a bag. So I do like Toledo +7 or better in that game.
And then you also, day after Christmas, like Kansas State -7 against Rutgers a little bit.
Yeah. Greg Schiano and Rutgers would be a team that I normally would like to bet on in bowl season because I feel like his guys are going to care about the bowl. However, I would expect Kyle Monangai to opt out of this game. I don't think that's confirmed, but I would be surprised if he plays. And he's kind of their whole offense. And the thing working against Rutgers too is like Kansas State's another team that I would want to bet on in bowl season. They've got a young quarterback that's not in the portal and talented that's going to show up and play. So I think there's just a bad situation for Rutgers. Otherwise, I would want to bet on them. But Kansas State here against Rutgers is another one that I like.
Let me ask you about two more things before we go. One is early lines on potential semifinal matchups that are out right now, at least on DraftKings and I'm sure on some other sites. Is there any reason to bet stuff like this? For instance, the Boise State region. Right now, you could bet SMU -5.5 against Boise State or Penn State -11.5 versus Boise State, or obviously take the Boise State side with the plus numbers. Texas would be a 12.5 point favorite over Arizona State. Clemson would be a 4.5 point favorite over Arizona State. Oregon would be a 1.5 point favorite over Ohio State, and Oregon would be a 5.5 point favorite over Tennessee. And then Notre Dame would be a 1.5 point favorite over Georgia, but Georgia would be a 6.5 point favorite over Indiana. Is there any reason to do this? Do you think the lines could move substantially enough after the games that if you really feel something, you should bet it now? And let me use our example of Clemson, right? Clemson versus Arizona State. You get Clemson -4.5. If Clemson drubs Texas, could that get over a touchdown? And then, right, if you bet this right now and Clemson loses to Texas, the bet just voids and you get your money back, right? Because you're betting a game that doesn't exist. So if you like Clemson, would there be a reason to bet this right now for the next round?
Yeah, I think so. And again, like we'd have to go one by one through these matchups because as you were saying them, I was like, yes on this team, no on this team. Like, for instance, the Clemson example, perfect example. Yes, if you think Clemson's going to win, like I would bet them against the spread against Arizona State now because they're going to have a huge win against, if this plays out, they're going to have a huge win against Texas. Even if it's by a point, they're still going to be getting a ton of market credit for that. So that number is probably going to be more like 6 or 7 after the Texas game. So in the Clemson example, yes, I would bet Clemson early. In the, let's say, Oregon example,
right?
If you think Ohio State is going to beat Tennessee, but you would like Oregon against Ohio State, I would bet Oregon. I would wait to bet Oregon because I think if Ohio State beats Tennessee, particularly if it goes the way, kind of my numbers say it's going to go, and then everyone forgets about the Michigan game and it's like, oh, Ohio State's back. I think that could be more like a pick 'em. So then you're going to get a better number on Oregon. Okay. So it just depends on the matchup. But yes, and as a general answer to your question, yes, there would be some value in certain situations to bet those early lines.
Okay. So the last thing, and I guess this is just stuff that's kind of fun that I don't think you can handicap, right? But there's some overall playoff specials. Again, as I look at DraftKings, you can bet on the number of overtime games. That if you think there's going to be at least one overtime game in the playoff, you'd get that at plus 120. If you think there won't be an overtime game, you get that at minus 150. You can bet on like the total of the seeds of what will be in the championship game. Like if you think it's going to be number 1 Oregon versus number 6 Penn State in the title game, then you could bet that the total of the seeds in the title game will be 7, and you'd get that at plus 340 right now. That's just stuff like that. You can bet on how many road wins will happen in the first round. You can bet on, this is a little bit like, for instance, exact number of first round road wins. We talked about, do you think at least one underdog is going to win? You can bet on no road wins plus 170, 1 road win plus 100, 2 road wins plus 370, 3 road wins plus 1,000. All the underdogs win plus 6,000. But so I think one underdog will win.
Yep.
So now you don't have to pick which underdog. I can think that it's Clemson, be wrong on that, and it turns out that it's actually Indiana. Yep. And you win the bet. The thing I like to do is win the bet when I'm wrong in my thinking. So to make a bet at 1 road win at plus 100, does that make sense to you? And, you're not going to crunch the numbers instantaneously here, but does that make sense to you? That if you're actually going to bet Clemson on the money line, maybe also bet this, and now you get some wiggle room because maybe you have the wrong underdog.
I don't think so. I think so. Let's say you were planning on throwing $10 on that at plus 100. That's just a very short number. I think, again, trying to do quick math here on the spot, I think you would be better off taking like a quarter of a unit and putting it on every underdog money line in the individual game. Because again, we're talking about spreads of a touchdown or more. So you would come out way more ahead in that situation. Plus then it doesn't just have to be 1. If 2 win, like then you get, you win both of those individual bets. So I think if that's kind of your line of thinking, that's the way I'd go, is just to put like a little bit on all of the underdog money lines versus betting that at plus 100. Yeah. I mean, that's a coin toss. You're kind of getting screwed on that number, I think.
Okay. And then the other thing I wish they had a North versus South thing. We got to get a gambling site to go with us on that. Nobody thinks about the sport the exact way we do. But there's a lot of stuff about, by conference, which conference will win the national championship and that kind of thing. Let's finish with this though. The overall odds to win the national championship: Oregon plus 360, Texas plus 360, Ohio State plus 475, Georgia plus 500, Penn State plus 600, Notre Dame plus 750, and then everybody else is 25 to 1 or more. Mm-hmm. Is there somebody that you like, what your numbers tell you plus the odds that you're getting? Is there a national championship pick you'd like now as a bet?
There would only be 2 out of that group that I would consider, just based on the odds and what I think that team's potential ceiling is. And that would be Ohio State and Notre Dame.
Okay.
Ohio State mostly just because they've been much shorter than that all season, and now they're coming off the Michigan loss. So like, if you're going to buy them, now would be the time to buy Ohio State before the Tennessee game. Like, you definitely want to do that before the game. And then Notre Dame, I actually wrote them up for VSiN last week or 2 weeks ago at plus 1,100. Now that's already down to plus 750. So again, they're number one in my power ratings right now. So from how they're playing, what their ceiling perspective kind of is, like that would be a reasonable bet as well. But that's really the only two I would consider. I mean, we don't know what Carson Beck's status is with Georgia. So, Georgia, yes, plus 500 is a decent number on them relative to where it's been all year. But, if they're going to have to play Gunnar Stockton, like, you don't know what that's going to look like. So Ohio State and Notre Dame would really be the only two I would consider there.
Okay. All right. He's Tyler Shoemaker. We've had a great time all year doing this stuff, betting on these things. We'll check back in before the end of the season when we get closer to the national championship game and keep doing what we're doing. If they want to follow you, TShoe, the folks who say, God, I guess I love TShoe, but I don't want to have to muddle through this Doug nonsense to get TShoe's expertise. Where else can they find you?
Yeah, follow me on X at TShoe Index, and you can get my women's college basketball plays and projections every day on VSiN.com, every weekday on VSiN.com. And here on our KOTN feed, you can find me and Bill Landis Friday night after the Notre Dame-Indiana game. We'll do a live show, and then Saturday night after the Ohio State-Tennessee game, we'll wrap up everything that happened on Saturday. So we will see you guys there. For now, thanks as always to our producer, Mike Yorostowski, for making us look good and sound good. He's Tyler Shoemaker. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Bets of the North on Kings of the North.